Welcome to the Neighborhood Law Center. I'm your host, Melvin Burris, and today we're going to talk about immigration law and issues. Our guest today is attorney Liliana Yanez.
Liliana Yanez.
Yanez, okay. I'll call you counselor.
Or
you
can call me professor.
Or professor, okay. On that vein, could you tell the audience a little about yourself, Professor?
Sure. I didn't mean to be so formal. I teach in the Immigrant and Refugee Rights Clinic at the CUNY School of Law, and as the name suggests, I practice in immigration law as well.
Okay. All right. Well, let's get on with the program then. Could you give us a background or a little background about the immigration service system itself? I think there were some changes in 1996 and then 2003, and let's get our audience up to speed on this.
Sure. There were changes in 1996. There were pretty punitive measures that the then INS, Immigration and Nationality Service, took in 1996, and it was mainly targeted at people who had committed crimes in the past. It really penalized people further. So in addition to having paid the debt to society for whatever crime you had committed in the past, you then, the laws in 96 really expanded the grounds of what's called deportation, and so people could be deported for those crimes in the past. 2003, after the September 11th attacks, there were also further punitive measures that were taken against immigrants and in the name of securing the borders of the United States that have had lasting effects on immigrants.
Okay, what were some of those changes? The integration of 2 or 3 different departments or something like that?
That's right, the creation of the Department of Homeland Security. So then the INS ceases to exist, and the Department of Homeland Security now is charged with policing the borders, which is the Customs and Border Protection, and Immigration and Customs Enforcement, which is called ICE, and the CIS, which is Citizenship and Immigration Services, which also grants services, what the INS used to do.
Okay, you talked about the punitive damages that was implemented when we had these changes. Was any benefits bestowed within these?
Yeah, I think I meant punitive measures.
Measures, okay.
Yeah, benefits that were bestowed since '96. There weren't any.
Okay, that made it nice, short and sweet. Okay, well let me ask you this question. I'm an undocumented person, and I'm here in the United States, and now I want to get legal permanent status. How do I go about doing that?
Okay, so let's give you nice facts, right? So you're looking for legal permanent residence, so a green card, right? You are undocumented. Let's just say that you entered through Canada, undetected by the immigration system, and you've been living here for the last 10 years. You've married a U.S. citizen, so you should be able to apply for a green card, right? Because after all, you are married to a U.S. citizen. The immigration laws prohibit anybody who entered without documentation to get a green card in the United States. So the fact that you're married to a U.S. citizen or the fact that you have U.S. citizen children doesn't help you at all in getting a green card because you entered without documentation.
Documentation meaning?
You didn't pass through a border, right?
Okay.
So you didn't enter with a visa, you didn't enter legally.
Okay.
So even though you're married to a U.S. citizen, and there are thousands of people like that, I've seen them in practice, they're unable to get green cards.
So I can't get a visa? I can't get a green card?
You can't get a green card, no. You'll have to decide, right? Will you remain in the United States and continue working at whatever job you've gotten without authorization, right? Continue working there and helping and supporting your wife and family and living that way until there is some change in the law, or you can decide to go home and take your U.S. citizen wife and your U.S. citizen children back to your native country.
Well, what is the chances of me coming back or getting back into the United States?
If you've entered unlawfully, which, as we said, you did, you are ineligible to return after you leave for 10 years. So if you leave, you can't come back for 10 years.
Okay. Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. Okay. Then we hear a lot of we have a lot in the newspapers. We hear a lot of talk about the fact that people are getting green cards. Well, who are the folks that's trying to get green cards?
Yeah, green cards are only available to a small group of people, and usually it's only through work or through family members. Except in the case of somebody who's undocumented, right, who's unable to get a green card through a family member, and also unable to get a green card through work. So it's for a small percentage who have either a U.S. citizen or a legal permanent resident spouse, parent, or child, and in some cases a brother or sister, or somebody whose employer is petitioning for them.
Okay.
But there are also other requirements that that person has to fulfill. But you
Okay.
at least need that, you know.
Okay, so you're answering my question. What are the ways to obtain legal permanent status here? And you're saying that the only way to do that is?
Right, through a family member, or a close family member. It can't be like an uncle or a distant cousin, or through employment.
And that relative have to have gotten citizenship here already.
Right, has to be either a citizen or, in some cases, a legal permanent resident.
Okay, okay. So well, the paper makes it seem like it's easier to get citizenship than what it really is.
Yeah, it's a common misconception, and most people are saying, oh, why doesn't everybody just do it the legal way? Even if you have a legal permanent, a U.S. citizen parent, or well, if you have a U.S. citizen parent or child, it's what's called an immediate relative, so it's a different matter. But if you have, let's say, a legal permanent spouse, sometimes that can take 3 years. It depends, right? So you either have to be separated if the person's in the home country, or here without any status until it's your time, until they reach your number.
Okay, let's try another track. What are the different ways that non-citizens can live in the United States?
Yeah, there are a number of non-citizens living in the United States, right? Some people are here on visas, right? Work visas, temporary visas, such as religious workers, workers who work at professional organizations or professional positions. They're here temporarily. There are, since the earthquake in Haiti, people who are here who are Haitian are here under what's called temporary protected status. There are people who are asylees. That's also a semi-permanent status. So there are a number of different ways that non-citizens are here.
Okay. And then I guess we talked about how can one legally live here, but I mean, it seems to be very difficult. What about social services? Are illegal or undocumented folks here entitled to social services or health care or education?
No, they're not entitled to health care. They're not entitled to any social benefits. They are children under 18 are entitled to a free education under the Supreme Court case.
Okay, so all right, let's talk about if a person is undocumented. Then, how does he survive in the United States if he's not eligible for social services, or if he
Yeah, you know, I'm going to answer that question, and then we're going to go back to the legal pathways, because I think it would help to illustrate how difficult it is, even if you're doing it legally. So a person who's undocumented, how does he survive? He has to take whatever job he can find, right? And in this economy, we know how difficult that is. His employer may or may not know that he's undocumented, and so may pay him at whatever wage he wants. He's got he thinks he has very few protections, but in fact the Department of Labor protects all workers, whether documented or undocumented. But he has no access to social services, he has no access to health care. And now I want to illustrate the point about how difficult it is if you're trying to navigate the system legally. So let's say there are a lot of foreign students in the United States. That's another status that you could be in temporarily. So you're studying at CUNY or wherever, and you have a foreign student visa. And you complete your course of study, and you get your degree. So you're then allowed 1 year to work in the United States in the particular field that you received your degree in. After that 1 year, it's up to you to find an employer who is willing to petition for you, willing to sponsor you for a long-term position, right? One of the, and then it's very narrow what kind of position can be petitioned for. It has to be a professional position. So if you've got your degree in chemistry, you have to find an employer who's going to give you a job as a chemical engineer or somehow working in that field. And we know how difficult the economy is now, right? So even people who are U.S. citizens and don't need an employer to petition for them are having a lot of difficulty finding a job. So unless you find an employer and unless that employer is willing to petition for you and fill out a host of documentation and also pay you a certain salary, which is a high, or the prevailing wage, then you cannot remain legally in the United States. So having a degree, you still have to find a position and then find an employer who's willing to petition for you.
Okay. Well, in that light, aren't there a lot of employers who are recruiting foreigners into the United States in a particular area of an intellect or tell us about that.
Yeah, the H-1B, that's the visa I'm talking about. There are 65,000 visas available to any professional, so anybody who has attained at least a bachelor's degree. And those, you know, it's a finite number, those 65,000. Because the economy is the way it is, sometimes there are enough visas for the year for the people who want them. But most of the time there aren't because there are only 65,000
per year.
Per year, yeah, per year, yeah. And this year, 2011, right, begins in the fiscal year begins in October. So I guess fiscal year 2012. So the cap for this amount of visas was reached in January. So those people will have to wait until October in order to receive this visa. But that entire time that they're here, they're not in any status. So they must leave and wait for the visa in their home country or remain here in an undocumented or in another status.
And if, as you said before, if they leave to go to their home country, they may not be able to get back in.
That's right. That's
okay.
right. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's talk about then, it's interesting some of the concepts you brought up. The Arizona law. I mean, it's what we're hearing is that the federal government is not taking a proactive, being proactive in legalization of foreigners. And so now states feel that they have to do that themselves. And so we get to Arizona, which has now come up with their own immigration laws. What are the benefits or the negatives of doing what Arizona's doing? Because they're addressing some of those issues that you're referring to. And the biggest part is, how do you go from being illegal to legal?
Well, because immigration law is a federal law, Arizona can't confer legal status on anybody. So in my opinion, there really is no benefit to somebody who's undocumented and living in Arizona under the new Arizona scheme. That said, it's true that there hasn't been any immigration reform in many years. In fact, there's been only, immigration reform has currently been tied to immigration enforcement, and there's no agreement on, well, there's a lot of agreement on enforcement, but there's no agreement on immigration reform. In my opinion, those things should be separated, right? We should deal with immigration reform separately from immigration enforcement. And what Arizona is doing is mostly immigration enforcement. So trying to enforce the immigration laws in the state of Arizona. I haven't been to Arizona since then, but I know that I hear on the professor blogs and other legal blogs that people who are undocumented are leaving Arizona by the tens of hundreds. And I guess, you know, Arizona may see what impact that will have to the state and to the revenues of Arizona. When people think about somebody who's here undocumented, they assume that the person isn't paying taxes. Right? There are ways for somebody who's undocumented to pay taxes, and in fact, I know a lot of people who are undocumented and pay taxes through a tax ID number. And the Internal Revenue Service issues tax ID numbers to everybody who wants one. And you may report income, and a lot of people do report income with the expectation that this will one day help them if there is immigration reform.
And and what other ways are they paying taxes that you
They're
mentioned
paying
before?
taxes through property taxes, right? They don't get a property bill the way you and I get for being homeowners, but they're paying rent. And so the landlord is paying the property taxes through the rental income that a person who's undocumented is paying. They're also paying sales tax through all the things that they buy. We all get taxed at the same rate, sales tax. So somebody who's undocumented and is making purchases in the county and the state is also paying sales tax.
Okay. Well, let's look at what Utah's done then. Look, Utah has addressed the very issue that you referred to for illegals in the United States. How to go from a illegal basis to a legal basis, which, as you said before, for myself, I would have to go leave the country and never come back. But nobody wants to leave because they can't get back in. So they have come up with a way that they can attain legal status and yet stay in the United States, and that's millions of people.
And again, you know, Utah, I think, is going to have the same problem as Arizona, trying to confer an Utah is trying to confer an immigration benefit without having the authority to do that. Only the federal government can confer the immigration benefit. And I think you also bring up a good point. This people who can't leave. Before 2001 and even around in the 90s, the border was very porous, and you know, you've heard people talk about this. That people moved back and forth across the border, and in fact, that's what people did. They moved here to work, let's say to work on farms or work in a seasonal industry, and people didn't want to remain. People wanted to go home, so people went home, and then came back when there was work, and there was this movement back and forth. These punitive enforcement measures have forced people to stay here because it's very difficult to move back and forth, right? There was this, in the 90s, there's this kind of unspoken agreement, right, that people would be allowed to move back and forth, and people did. You know, industry needed workers, and workers wanted to work, and so they came, worked, and industry was happy, workers were happy, and then workers went home and stayed with families and everything. And since 96, and since the border has become less porous, then people have remained in the United States, and these people have remained without any status.
Okay. One point I just want to bring out is the fact I think Utah and Arizona is trying to get a waiver, as Wisconsin did with Social Services, is trying to get a waiver to use this their program as a model, a future model for the United States. So that's how they're trying to do it, with a waiver. Of course, they can't convey the legal status, but if they get a waiver and it works out, then maybe the government will do something. And I guess that's what they're trying to say and do, is do something.
Right, do something.
Rather than being staying in inertia. All right, so let's talk about refugee and what's the other word there?
Asylees.
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 What is the difference between the two and an immigrant? That we know them as an undocumented immigrant.
Yeah. Well, actually, an asylee is not an undocumented immigrant. A refugee
asylee is not
an undocumented immigrant. A refugee is conferred that status abroad. So the U.S. goes to areas of conflict, or U.S. employees from the I think it's I actually don't know which office, but federal employees go and assess damage in an area, right? Political strife or whatever it is, and determine if the person is a legitimate refugee and confer refugee status on that person. And that person may then enter the United States as a refugee. An asylee goes through the process in the United States. So people who are fleeing persecution in their home countries, mostly persecution, somehow make it to the United States.
Okay.
Somehow, you know, if you're fleeing persecution, you know, it's hard to gather all of your documents and then go to the embassy to apply for a visa, right? You're fleeing, you're running for your life. So somehow make it to the United States, paying people to get them here, or however, just to be safe, and then apply for asylum status in the United States. And this is another, since we're going back and forth to the 96, post-96, 2003, this is another area where there have been more punitive measures. If you are caught in the United States undocumented, so you have fled persecution, let's say, in this instance, and you have a legitimate fear of returning to your home country, you are placed in detention. And you are detained until you can prove why you can't return to your home country. Sometimes the judge will confer a bond. So I've seen bonds set as low as $7,500 to be released from detention, and as high as $15,000 to be released. So if you think about somebody who is fleeing persecution, who comes just with a shirt on his back and maybe not even a passport or anything like that, and is placed in detention until he can come up with $7,500 or $15,000, it shocks me to even retell this, and it's also shocking that this is the way we treat people who are fleeing persecution.
Well, how do we know, how do we distinguish between the illegal or undocumented person coming in and persons coming in as on asylum basis? How do the officials differentiate between the two?
There are special officers that give what's called a credible fear interview, and that at that interview that you're asked particular questions about why you fear returning, right? And if it has to do with a political basis or national origin basis, they determine that. And if they determine that you do have a credible fear of returning, then you're allowed to remain in the United States, but you have to remain detained.
Okay. Do you get a visa card?
You
green card? You get a green card?
Eventually. If you're granted, if you win your case.
If you win your case,
right,
then you get a green card.
That's right.
So then you get benefits. Okay, but what I'm saying is, if we have two people coming in, and one is saying, I'm coming in because of some fear in my country, another one is just crossing the border, but he used that too as an excuse. I mean, you could have millions of people doing this, can't you?
A million seems like a high number.
Well,
but
quite a few people do.
Yeah, that's true. But people who have legitimate fears are able to speak about it with particularity, for the most part. Whereas a person who's crossing and just coming to work may not even know that he could have a legitimate fear. You know, may not even know that he could express that and he'd be able to stay.
Okay, it's pretty subjective then, you're saying.
It is pretty subjective, yeah.
Okay. All right. So let's talk about now some. We're here in the United States. Let's talk about a person who's here in the United States, and once they get their visa, what do we do now? What do we do for the child that's still in the mother country?
Well, it depends on how the person.
Or can they get the child back over here?
Yeah, it depends on really. Do you mean the asylee? Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Or? Yeah.
Asylee.
So right, it's the asylum process. If you are caught at the border or caught in the interior, is a long process. It's before an immigration judge. Immigration judges are very overworked and have very long, very heavy calendars. You know, it could be 2 or 3 years before you get your case heard before an immigration judge. At that time, you may petition for, your child may come over if you're an asylee.
Okay.
Minor child, under 21.
All right, let's talk about naturalization. Okay. How does one become a citizen through naturalization? And what is naturalization?
Yeah, it's somebody petitioning to become a U.S. citizen. So after you have been a legal permanent resident for most people, it's 5 years. For a select few, it's somebody who's been married to a U.S. citizen. That person may apply after 3 years. And then you petition the government and demonstrate that you're a person of good moral character, that you've lived continuously in the United States for those 5 years, or half of those 5 years, and that you're able to pass a civics and history requirement. and that you are attached to the principles of the Constitution. After you demonstrate all of that, then you get naturalization. You become a U.S. citizen.
Okay. Okay, I won't go into undocumented more because we've already determined that if you're here illegal, there's no way you're going to get citizenship.
Absent immigration reform, yes.
Okay.
That's right.
So then let's talk about how does a person who's here can attain, where do they have to go formed for for legalization? What is this, to get something like this, to get the naturalization? Is there forms they have to fill out? Where can they go get them? Is there a lottery system or?
Yeah, well, the USCIS website is very comprehensive, and for every immigration benefit there is a form and a very large fee attached to that form. And the USCIS website has...
What's the USIC? What
it's
is that
www.uscis.gov.
What is the USIC?
United States Citizenship and Immigration Service website. Yeah.
Okay,
so they're the ones who administer benefits. So they have all the forms on their website on how to get naturalization and how to apply for a number of visas, for legal permanent residence, all that stuff.
Okay.
This lottery system you talk about is another way for somebody who's here in the United States, usually in valid legal status, or that's who may benefit from it. That person may enter what's called a green card lottery, and if she's chosen, then she may apply for a green card that way.
Who's this person?
Random person, foreign-born person. So it's only available to countries that are underrepresented in the United States, or nationals of countries that are underrepresented in the United States.
Okay. All right, looks like we're running out of time.
Oh.
Okay, I know you're disappointed. It was very interesting and very informative, but with a little time left, could you just kind of sum up what we'd like to leave with our audience about immigration and immigration issues?
I think what I certainly want to leave the audience with is that it's not easy to get legal status in the United States, and that immigration reform should be on top of everybody's agenda because it's a human rights issue. It's about people being able to live and work where they want to work.
Okay. Well, thank you for coming, Professor. We really enjoyed it. Thank you for being with us tonight. We'll see you next week. And remember, go to our website, www.neighborhoodlawcenter.com, to see other programs. And this one will be on the program also. Until next week, peace and God bless.